The alien war camp stretched wide across the barren plain of a forgotten moon. Fires burned in large pits, shadows moved under the light, and voices of mercenaries rose high into the night sky. Different species gathered there, soldiers who had fought across countless systems. Some had armor scratched with old wounds. Others carried weapons that dripped with strange poisons, and all of them were loud. They laughed, they argued, and they told stories of the battles they had survived. The air was heavy with the smell of fuel, iron, and cooked meat, and the camp felt alive with noise and pride. A group of younger recruits sat near the largest fire, eager to hear tales from the veterans. They were excited and full of questions, trying to prove themselves by asking about the most dangerous enemies. One young alien with shining scales leaned forward and asked too quickly, his voice breaking through the laughter. He asked what everyone thought about the Earthborn Units. The words were not shouted. They were not even spoken with strength, but they cut through the noise like a blade. The camp fell quiet in an instant. The fire cracked, a weapon clicked, a pot of stew boiled over, but no one laughed anymore. The mercenaries looked at one another, their faces changing from proud to tense. Even the older veterans who had survived countless wars lowered their heads as if the question was dangerous to answer. The recruit felt the silence push against him, and he shifted uncomfortably. He tried to laugh, to take back his words, but the eyes of everyone around him burned with warning. A tall soldier covered in scars and missing one eye leaned forward and pointed a claw at the young one. His voice was low, almost a growl, as he told him never to speak that name without care. The recruit swallowed hard. He had asked about many enemies before and had heard songs of victories, but now no one spoke. The scarred mercenary spat into the fire and shook his head. He told the young ones that Earthborn units were not like others. He said there were reasons why even the strongest mercenary companies avoided talking about them. His tone was heavy, like he was carrying something he did not want to remember. Another soldier, older and quiet, lifted his cup and drank, but his hand trembled as he held it. The campfire light reflected in his eyes, and for a moment it seemed like he was far away, back on some battlefield long ago. The young recruits looked around, confused and afraid. They had heard of monsters made of metal, of living storms that destroyed fleets, of ancient machines that never died. They had heard of horrors across the galaxy, yet none of those names caused silence like this one. They wanted to ask more, but the mood was too heavy, and the warning from the scarred veteran was clear. The name of the Earthborn units carried weight that none of them understood. The night grew colder as the fires burned lower, and whispers moved through the camp. Small groups spoke softly, telling stories they would never say aloud in daylight. One mercenary said he had seen humans tear apart a unit 3 times their size. Another claimed that once a human squad entered a battlefield, they did not stop until every enemy had fallen. Their voices shook, as if saying the words too loud would bring danger closer. The recruits listened in silence now, no longer eager, no longer smiling. They realized that something about humans made veterans lose their pride. The silence in the camp was stronger than the fire, stronger than the laughter that had filled the air only moments ago. The name of Earthborn units had killed the mood like a sudden storm. Far away, beyond the firelight, a shadow moved at the edge of the camp. None of the mercenaries noticed it yet. The night stretched deep and wide, and the wind carried strange sounds. Somewhere out in the dark, boots pressed against the soil, heavy and steady. A figure stood alone, watching, silent and still. The scarred veteran finally spoke again, his voice rough. He said there was no glory in facing Earthborn units, only survival if luck was strong. He said that stories of victory against them were rare, and most of them ended in broken bodies and empty camps. His words carried the weight of memory, and the younger ones lowered their heads, too afraid to speak further. The night did not return to its noise. The laughter was gone. The songs were not sung again. Instead, the camp was filled with unease. Soldiers shifted in their seats, eyes scanning the shadows, as if the very mention of humans had brought their ghosts closer. The young recruit who had asked the question stared into the fire, his heart pounding. He wished he had never spoken. Above the camp, the moon's thin light revealed the plain stretching into endless darkness. Somewhere in that dark, beyond the eyes of the mercenaries, the silhouette of a soldier remained. It did not move, it did not speak, but its presence carried the promise of something coming, something that the mercenaries feared but could not stop. The whisper of Earthborn units had spread through the camp like a disease, and silence had taken control. None of them realized yet that the silence was a warning, and that their fear would soon have reason to grow stronger. For at the edge of the battlefield, unseen by most, a human figure stood waiting. The silence of the mercenary camp lingered long into the night. The young recruit who had asked the forbidden question sat frozen, his eyes shifting from one veteran to another, waiting for someone to speak. But the air was heavy, and even the strongest voices seemed afraid to break it. The fire crackled softly, throwing sparks into the dark sky, yet it gave no comfort. It only made the shadows longer and deeper. Finally, one of the oldest mercenaries shifted. He had thick gray skin and marks across his arms from battles too many to count. His face looked tired, like someone who had lived too long with memories he could not erase. He looked at the recruits with slow, heavy eyes and asked them if they truly wanted to know why the camp had fallen silent at the mention of Earthborn units. None of the younger ones answered, but their fear and curiosity were clear. They needed to understand. The old mercenary sighed and leaned closer to the fire. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but in the stillness, every word was heard. He spoke of a time when his company was hired to fight near the edges of human territory. The job seemed simple, nothing different from the countless wars mercenaries were called to fight. They expected resistance, but they also expected to crush it quickly. That was always the way. But then the Earthborn units arrived. The old soldier's voice shook as he described them. He said they were not like other armies, not like the arrogant species who fought with pride, not like the machines who fought with cold logic. They were different. When they entered the battlefield, their movements seemed chaotic, as if they had no plan. But somehow every action worked together perfectly. They adapted faster than anyone could predict. They turned mistakes into advantages, and no amount of fire or numbers could stop them. The recruits leaned in, eyes wide, trying to picture what he described. He told them that humans were small compared to many species, fragile in ways, weaker in body than some, but their strength came from something deeper. He said they fought as if they carried the weight of every life beside them. They never abandoned one another, never left a comrade behind, and that made them terrifying. The enemy could not break their lines because their will was unshakable. Another veteran spoke then, his voice rough and broken. He told his own story. He had once fought in a battle where a single human squad was sent against an army much larger. He laughed bitterly, but there was no joy in it. He said he watched as that squad cut through soldiers 3 times their number, never stopping, never showing fear. They fought until the battlefield was silent, and when it was over, the survivors who faced them could not speak of it without trembling. The younger recruits shifted nervously. Their scales, fur, or plated skin reflected the firelight, but none of them felt its warmth anymore. They whispered among themselves, asking why such a small species could strike fear in hardened mercenaries. The veterans answered with silence first, then one of them finally explained. It was not the size of humans or their weapons. It was something inside them, something that no one could copy. They fought not for empire, not for coin, not for glory. They fought for each other, for survival, and that gave them strength beyond measure. The night grew colder, and the camp's noise never returned. Stories flowed in low voices. One mercenary claimed to have seen human warships move like predators in the dark, circling their prey before striking with perfect precision. Another told of an Earthborn captain who refused to retreat even when surrounded, holding ground until the enemy broke first. Each tale painted humans not as monsters of size or technology, but as something more dangerous, creatures who refused to lose. The young recruit who had first spoken sat trembling now. His question had opened a door and he wished he could close it again. He realized that even if the stories were half true, they were enough to explain the silence. The word Earthborn carried the weight of battles that had left scars on every soldier who faced them. As the night dragged on, the campfires burned lower. The shadows grew heavier and the sky above was filled with cold stars. The mercenaries knew that somewhere out there, beyond those stars, the Earthborn units were moving. They were not an empire with banners to warn of their coming, not machines with endless fleets. They were something worse. They were quiet until they struck, and when they struck, no one forgot. One recruit finally dared to speak again. His voice was small, almost shaking. He asked if they would ever face Earthborn units themselves. The old veteran looked at him for a long time and the silence returned. His answer was not clear, but the fear in his eyes was enough. He said the galaxy was large, but humans had a way of finding the places no one expected. He said if their path crossed with mercenaries, there would be no warning. only the sound of war and the silence that followed. The recruits looked into the fire, their faces pale, their hearts heavy. They had joined mercenary life seeking glory, but now they wondered if they had stepped into something far darker. The veterans knew it well, and that was why they never spoke the name lightly. For the mention of Earthborn Units was not a story, not a rumor. It was a warning carved into the memories of all who had lived to tell it. Far from the camp, hidden in the distance, the same shadow remained. The figure did not move, did not reveal itself, but its silence was heavy. The mercenaries spoke of Earthborn Units, but none of them realized that the shadow was already watching, already listening. The night ended without laughter, without song. The whispers of fear had replaced them. The camp was awake but restless, haunted by the stories of the humans who fought like no other. And when morning came, every mercenary knew the silence in their hearts would remain. The dawn on the barren moon came slowly, casting a pale glow over the mercenary camp. The fires from the night had died to embers, and the mercenaries stirred with heavy eyes and heavy hearts. No songs were sung in the morning, no loud boasts filled the air. The fear of the night before lingered like smoke, clinging to every thought. The recruits spoke little, and the veterans kept their silence as if words themselves might bring danger closer. Yet silence could not hold back memory. The veterans remembered battles, and those memories refused to stay buried. As the mercenaries moved about the camp, whispers spread again. Whispers of the humans. They were not spoken with courage, but with unease. Each whisper carried an image of chaos on the battlefield, of the unpredictable way humans fought, of the shadow that always followed them. A scarred mercenary stood near the edge of the camp, staring into the empty horizon. His mind returned to the first time he saw Earthborn Units. He had been young then, proud and fearless, ready to fight for coin without question. He remembered seeing humans for the first time. They looked so small, so fragile, covered in armor that seemed plain compared to the elaborate designs of other species. But when the battle began, his thoughts changed forever. He remembered the chaos. Humans moved as if every second was instinct. They did not wait for orders in the way other soldiers did. They did not freeze when plans collapsed. They adapted in moments, faster than reason, faster than fear. And when they charged, it was not for glory. It was for one another. He had seen one human carry another through fire, refusing to leave him behind even when surrounded. That image had carved itself into his memory, and even now it haunted him. Back in the camp, the younger recruits gathered again, still restless from the night. Their curiosity had not died, even though fear wrapped itself around their questions. One of them asked what made humans so dangerous if they were not stronger or faster than others. The veterans listened quietly. Then one of them answered. He said humans were dangerous because they were unpredictable. Every species had patterns in war, patterns learned over centuries. But humans had no single pattern. They could fight like machines, like beasts, like shadows, and they changed without warning. Another veteran spoke of a rumor he had heard long ago. He said some believed humans carried within them a kind of madness, a fire that burned brighter in battle. He claimed they were creatures born from struggle, from a world that forced them to survive in every possible way. This, he said, was why they never gave up, why they never surrendered. To fight humans was to fight something that refused to die. The recruits listened with pale faces, their hunger for answers fighting against the fear rising in them. They had wanted to hear of victories and trophies, but instead they heard of despair and survival. They began to understand why the camp had fallen silent at the mention of Earthborn Units. That day, orders arrived from their commanders. The mercenaries were told that human activity had been detected nearby. At first, the recruits thought it was only a rumor, another story to feed the fear. But the veterans did not laugh. They knew that where rumors of humans spread, reality often followed. The camp shifted uneasily. Some sharpened weapons with trembling hands, others checked their armor again and again. The older mercenaries gave no words of encouragement. They knew the truth too well. They had faced many armies, but humans carried a shadow unlike any other. As the sun set once more, the scouts returned. One of them stumbled into the camp, his breathing heavy, his skin pale. He had seen something in the distance. At first, the mercenaries demanded answers, their voices sharp with fear. The scout only shook his head, whispering words that made the camp fall silent once again. He said the warships had come. They were not large fleets like those of ancient empires. They were not mechanical giants that blocked out the stars. They were human ships moving like hunters in the void. The scout said they did not march like armies, they stalked like predators. He swore their movements felt alive, and he felt their eyes upon him even across the darkness of space. The veterans closed their eyes at this news, as if they had expected it all along. The recruits looked at one another, their fear now turning into dread. They had heard whispers, they had listened to stories, but now the shadow of Earth was no longer just memory. It was here. The night came again and the camp sat in uneasy silence. Some mercenaries argued whether to fight or flee, their voices filled with panic. Others said nothing, knowing that once humans had been seen, escape was already too late. The campfires burned low, casting weak light that could not drive away the heavy dark pressing around them. At the edge of the camp, the scarred veteran stood once more. He stared into the distance where the scout had pointed, where the ships now lurked unseen. He whispered to himself words no one else could hear. He said the humans were already here. He said the shadow of Earth had already fallen on them. The recruits lay awake that night, unable to close their eyes. They could feel it too now, the weight of unseen eyes, the silence before something terrible. And though none of them could say it aloud, they all knew the truth. The Earthborn Units were coming. The moon hung low in the dark sky, casting a pale silver glow over the mercenary camp. The fires had been fed again, but even the largest flames could not warm the fear that gripped the soldiers. They spoke less than before, their eyes flicking to the shadows at every sound. The arrival of the scouts' warning had killed whatever strength remained in their voices. Earthborn units were near. That thought alone was enough to hollow their hearts. In the commander's tent, a heated argument burned louder than the fires outside. The leaders of the different mercenary bands had gathered, their voices sharp and desperate. One shouted that they must leave immediately, that no coin was worth facing humans. Another slammed a heavy fist on the table, roaring that fleeing would mean shame and dishonor. They had taken contracts before, contracts that demanded strength, and running now would mark them as cowards across the galaxy. The argument grew wild, but underneath the noise was fear. None of them wanted to be the first to admit it. They were hardened killers, soldiers who had fought in battles most would not survive. Yet the name Earthborn made their pride crumble. The shadow of that name was heavier than any banner of an empire. One of the oldest commanders finally stood. His armor was battered, his face lined with scars. He spoke with a voice that cut through the noise. He reminded them that many armies had fallen trying to fight humans, armies larger and wealthier than theirs. He told them that shame was better than extinction, and if they chose to stay, they would not live to regret it. His words left the tent silent. Pride and survival battled in every heart. Outside, the mercenaries sat in silence, waiting for orders. The recruits huddled together, their eyes wide with terror they could not hide. One asked quietly what humans looked like up close, his voice trembling. No one answered. The veterans kept their silence, but their hands gripped their weapons tighter. Hours passed. The night grew colder. Then another scout stumbled into camp, half mad, his body shaking, his eyes wide like someone who had looked into the mouth of death. He fell to his knees, gasping, his voice breaking as he spoke.
He said he had seen the humans moving through the wastelands.
They did not march like soldiers. They stalked like predators, silent and patient. He swore he could hear their boots long before he saw them. He said their eyes glowed in the dark, steady and unblinking. The camp fell quiet again, all eyes fixed on the trembling scout. His words spread like fire through the soldiers, and the silence thickened. The recruits clung to one another, whispering prayers to gods who never answered. The veterans looked into the fire, their faces blank, as if they were already preparing themselves for death. The commanders returned from their meeting with heavy steps. They gave no speeches, no promises. They ordered the camp to prepare for battle. Even those who had argued for retreat now saw there was no escape. The humans were already here. The shadow of Earth was already upon them. The camp changed that night. Weapons were checked again and again. Armor was strapped tighter, though none believed it would save them. Soldiers sharpened blades, loaded rifles, and whispered to themselves. But the noise of preparation could not hide the dread. Every action was slower than it should have been. Every hand shook when it should have been steady. The fires burned lower as the night deepened. Then faintly a sound carried through the still air. It was not a shout. Not the roar of engines, not the crash of machines. It was softer, heavier, more terrible. The sound of boots, they were not many, yet each step seemed to echo through the soil. The mercenaries froze. Some turned to look into the darkness beyond the firelight, but they saw nothing. Only the steady rhythm of footsteps grew closer. The sound was enough to break their strength, for in that moment, they all realized what the veterans had known all along. Humans did not need to fight to win. Their silence, their presence, their approach was enough to shatter courage before the first shot was fired. The scarred veteran rose slowly, his eyes fixed on the darkness. He whispered that the storm had arrived. No one argued. The soldiers stood, their weapons raised, but their hearts were already breaking. The silence before the storm pressed down on them heavy as iron, and they knew the first strike would come soon. In the dark, beyond the firelight, shadows shifted. Figures moved with perfect control, unseen yet felt. The humans were there, close enough to taste the fear they created. The mercenaries stood waiting, their breaths shallow, their minds screaming for escape. But there was no escape. The silence had trapped them, and then, at the edge of hearing, a voice spoke. Calm, steady, human. It was not loud, but it cut through every soldier in the camp. They could not understand the words, but the tone was enough. It was the voice of someone who did not fear death, someone who carried certainty in every step. The silence held heavier than ever, pressing on every heart in the camp. And in that silence, the mercenaries realized the truth they had tried to deny. The Earthborn Units were not coming. They were already here. The camp stood frozen, every soldier holding his breath as the sound of boots echoed through the darkness. The fires burned low, sending weak light across the dirt, and the shadows seemed to move with a life of their own. The mercenaries gripped their weapons, but their hands trembled. No war cry was shouted, no orders were given. The silence was total, broken only by the steady rhythm of human steps. From the edge of the night, figures appeared. They were not many, but their presence was heavier than entire armies. The humans moved with calm precision, each step measured, each movement deliberate. Their armor was plain compared to the decorated plates of alien mercenaries. Their weapons simple in design, yet there was something in the way they carried themselves that silenced pride and replaced it with dread. The scarred veteran stepped forward slowly, his face pale in the firelight. He had seen this before long ago, and he knew what was coming. He whispered that the battle was already lost. The recruits heard his words and felt the truth in them. No one argued. The silence pressed harder, heavier, until even breathing felt like defiance. The mercenary commanders tried to rally their troops. They shouted orders, told them to form ranks to prepare for the fight. But their voices sounded hollow, empty of conviction. The soldiers obeyed, but their movements were stiff and clumsy. It was not discipline that guided them now, only fear. The humans stopped at the edge of the firelight. They stood still, their faces hidden beneath their helmets, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark. They did not raise their weapons, they did not rush to strike. They only waited, calm and patient, like hunters who knew their prey would break on its own. That patience was worse than any sudden attack. It told the mercenaries that the humans had no doubt, no weakness. A single human stepped forward then. His voice carried across the camp, low and steady, each word like a blade. The mercenaries could not understand his language, yet they understood the weight of it. It was not the voice of a killer drunk on blood, not the roar of an emperor demanding victory. It was the voice of certainty, the voice of someone who knew the outcome before the first shot was fired. The recruits shook with terror. Some dropped their weapons, unable to hold them any longer. Others stepped back, their courage breaking with every heartbeat. Even the veterans lowered their eyes, remembering battles where they had seen this same calm, this same unshakable resolve. The silence of the camp was broken not by gunfire, but by fear itself. Then it began. The humans moved as one, not in a rush, not in a frenzy, but with perfect control. Their weapons fired with sharp precision, each shot placed where it mattered. Mercenaries screamed, but their cries were drowned by the storm of human fire. The chaos of battle should have favored the larger force, yet here it only revealed their weakness. The humans adapted, adjusted, and struck with terrifying speed. A group of mercenaries tried to flank them, moving through the shadows with blades raised high. But the humans were already there, waiting, cutting them down before they could strike. Another squad charged with heavy weapons, shouting to cover their fear, but their weapons never reached their targets. The humans broke their line, scattered them, and moved on without pause. The recruits saw it all. They saw their elders fall, their commanders silenced, their pride shattered. They saw humans fighting not like mercenaries chasing coin, not like soldiers forced by duty, but like brothers and sisters bound by something stronger. Every human fought with the same will, the same fire, as if they shared one heart. The scarred veteran fought too, but his eyes never left the humans. He saw in them the same truth he had seen years ago. He understood why mercenaries went silent at their name, why entire armies broke before facing them. It was not their weapons, not their numbers, not even their tactics. It was the certainty in their eyes, the refusal to bend, the unity that could not be broken. Against that, no mercenary band could stand. The battle ended faster than it had begun. The fires burned lower, and the camp was covered in silence once more. Bodies lay scattered, weapons abandoned, and only a few mercenaries still breathed. Those who survived did not raise their heads. They sat trembling, too broken to resist, too shaken to even speak. The humans stood among them, calm as before. They did not cheer, they did not boast. They did not need to. Their silence was enough. The surviving mercenaries lowered their weapons willingly, surrendering without a word. Some wept, some begged, but the humans gave no response. They only looked at them with the same steady eyes that had carried them through countless wars. As the dawn broke once again over the barren moon, the recruits who survived understood what the veterans had tried to tell them. They understood why no mercenary spoke the name of Earthborn Units without fear. The humans were not the largest, not the strongest, not the most advanced, but they were the ones who could not be broken, the ones who turned silence into a weapon sharper than any blade. The scarred veteran fell to his knees, his strength gone. He whispered the truth one last time, his voice carrying to all who could hear. He said that the name Earthborn was not just a warning. It was the end of pride, the end of defiance, the end of war itself. For when humans came, the battlefield no longer belonged to anyone else. And that was why alien mercenaries went quiet at the mention of Earthborn Units. Not because of stories, not because of rumors, but because they knew the truth. To face humans was not to fight an enemy. It was to face the very definition of war.